They used to call me the failure of the Blake family whispers behind my back, polite pity to my face, and the constant echo of wasted potential for a solid 15 years. That all changed the day they stepped onto my private jet and saw what I'd been building in silence. It wasn't about revenge, but I'd be lying if I said the shock on their faces didn't taste a little sweet. The invitation to the annual Blake family barbecue sat unopened on my marble countertop, the thick cream envelope catching the blush of the Arizona sunrise, pouring through my glass-walled penthouse. Red script gleamed beneath the rays like it knew something big was coming. For years, I'd maintained the distance, polite RSVPs, vague excuses, and complete radio silence. But all of that, it was about to come undone, and not because I wanted it to. The universe apparently had other plans. I looked down at my phone for the 100th time that morning, my thumb hovering over the headline that shattered everything I'd tried to keep under wraps. Forbes, 30 under 40. Avery Blake's virtual reality design empire valued at $4.1 billion. And that article dropping tomorrow, just 2 days before the reunion. So much for staying invisible. Ms. Blake came Jenna Carter's voice crisp through the intercom system. Your brother Grant is on line 1. Again. Of course. He'd been calling non-stop since the media blast hit. I sighed, rolled my shoulders back, and pressed the line. Hey, Grant, I said, keeping my tone light. What the hell, Avery? He barked. I just got off the phone with CNBC. They asked me how it feels to be the brother of a billionaire. A billionaire, Avery. You want to explain something to me? I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Scottsdale penthouse, the desert skyline stretching endlessly beyond. The early morning sun painted the landscape in burnt gold and warm ochre. I guess I said calmly, you'll find out with everyone else this weekend. Cut the crap, he snapped. You let us think you were broke. For years. Mom was convinced you were crashing on people's couches. Do you know how worried she was? I let out a half laugh, the kind that's more exhausted than amused. Worried, you mean all those pep talks about how I was throwing away my future. The gentle nudges toward Uncle Mark's insurance office. They were trying to help you, Avery. No, Grant, they were trying to mold me into something safe, predictable, acceptable. Silence crackled over the line. Classic Grant, the golden child. Harvard MBA heir, a parent to Blake Financial. The one who never questioned the plan. How long, he finally asked, his voice lower, more cautious. I strolled out onto my balcony, feeling the desert breeze roll over me as one of my 3 Teslas quietly pulled into the driveway below. Remember when I moved into that ratty little apartment near downtown Tempe? He hesitated. Yeah, when you started that 3D art stuff. That was 15 years ago. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The realization was settling in fast. That's when it started, I said aloud, more to myself than to him. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind for tossing aside a finance degree to dive into what Dad called playing with pixels. But what none of you knew is that I'd already sold my first collection of VR sculptures for $660,000. $660,000, Grant repeated, stunned. Back then, yeah. 6 months later, I sold another collection. That one went for $200,000. By the time Dad was announcing at Christmas dinner that I was still figuring things out, I had already crossed the $1 million mark. I could picture him now sitting in his home office, forehead creased mentally, calculating everything. But you borrowed money from Mom and Dad for rent, he stammered. You drove that beat-up Civic until what, last year? I laughed for real this time. I never borrowed money, Grant. I asked them to invest. Big difference. They passed loudly. And the Civic. That was a strategy, just like this penthouse. Just like the Gulfstream G700 parked in a private hangar downtown. There was a long pause. Private jet, he whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. Avery, how rich are you? I heard the disbelief bleed through his polished tone like a hairline fracture in glass. And suddenly I saw every dinner, every holiday, every subtle put-down they never realized. I noticed me, the sweet but struggling one, the dreamer everyone quietly pitied. Forbes will say $7.2 billion, I replied, but that's modest. Real numbers closer to 10. The sound Grant made was somewhere between a gasp and a tiny scream. I've got a board meeting in a few, Grant. We'll talk more at the reunion, I added smoothly, and ended the call. I turned toward the intercom. Jenna, I said, is everything ready? Yes, Miss Blake, she answered without missing a beat. Jet is fueled. The Rolls-Royce fleet is scheduled for family pickups. Venue is secured. The island is prepped. All NDAs are signed. Perfect. I picked up the invitation again, its glossy weight suddenly feeling ironic in my hand. For 15 years, I let them box me into the role of the black sheep, the odd one out, the creative disappointment. But this time they'd see exactly who I'd become. My phone buzzed again, a text from Brooke. Brooke, OMG, Avery, that Forbes thing, tell me it's a joke. WTH is going on. I smiled and left her on read. Funny how the quiet ones always seem to cause the biggest waves. The intercom buzzed again. Ms. Blake, both your parents are on the line. I didn't blink. Tell them I'm in a meeting? I checked my Cartier watch and grabbed my sunglasses tablet and notes for the next pitch. Also, Jenna, call the helipad. I think I'll take the chopper to the office today. As I gathered my things and walked toward the rooftop exit, my thoughts slipped back to where it all began the moment I chose to disappear in order to truly build something extraordinary. Diao. 15 years earlier, on a sun-drenched Sunday afternoon in the heart of Phoenix, I made a decision that would define everything. I chose silence. Not because I lacked courage or conviction, but because the room I sat in, the grand dining room of my parents' estate, was too full of condescension to hear me. Avery, my father, Richard Blake said with a hard glint in his eye, 3D design isn't real art. His voice echoed off the imported stone walls like a gavel, each word a dismissal. He set down his wine glass and leaned forward, scrutinizing me with the same disdain he reserved for balance sheets that didn't add up. And this crypto art, he added, lips curling into a smirk. It's a scam. No rational person would pay for digital gibberish. I was 22, fresh out of Wharton, the ink on my degree barely dry. I'd come to that dinner with hope clutched tightly in my chest, eager to share my vision, my world of immersive digital art and blockchain-backed ownership. But seated at that sprawling mahogany table under the ornate chandelier, I found only skepticism wrapped in polished decorum. Actually, Dad, I began, my voice careful, tentative, too eager to be understood. No, he snapped, cutting me off with the finality of a slammed door. You either join the firm like we agreed, or you're on your own. No safety net, no support. Consider yourself cut off. My mother, Margaret, always the picture of poised elegance, reached across the table with her trademark smile, the one that masked her pity like silk over steel. Sweetheart, she said, gently patting my hand as if I were a stubborn child, we're only concerned. You need something secure, something real, a proper career. I looked from her carefully painted face to my father's stern gaze, to Grant's silence, his usual deference to Dad's proclamations, and finally to Brooke, who watched with thinly veiled amusement, the corners of her mouth twitching upward. I saw no allies at that table, only judges. What they didn't know, and what I didn't share, was that just the week before, I had sold my very first VR art collection for $50,000. That 3 immersive galleries were courting me. That venture capital firms had begun flooding my inbox with interest. They didn't know, because I didn't tell them. And in that moment, I decided I never would. You're right, I said, standing. My voice was steady now, the shaking gone. I'll figure it out. 2 weeks later, I moved into a crumbling studio in downtown Tempe. The walls were thin, the pipes moaned, and the bathroom door didn't quite shut. They assumed I was broke, too proud, or too naive to ask for help. But in truth, I was building something no one in that dining room had the imagination to see. The first year was brutal 18-hour days filled with code sketches, mock-ups, late-night calls to engineers, and endless networking. I slept in short spurts on a futon that barely passed for furniture, my meals mostly instant noodles and caffeine. But in the middle of all that hardship, I created Neon Syntax, my first major digital collection. It sold out in 6 hours. Earnings $1.2 million. Every cent went back into the dream. I hired a small team, found better talent, launched my own platform, and little by little rewrote what digital ownership could mean. NFTs before they were cool, immersive VR galleries before the metaverse became a buzzword. Every breakthrough came with resistance from the world, but never from me. And each time I visited home, I played the part they expected, the humble, struggling sister. I drove the same battered Civic, wore faded jeans, smiled politely through dinner. Let me help with rent, Mom would say. No thanks, I'd reply with a smile as tight as my throat. I'm managing. I was doing more than managing. By the end of that first year, my net worth had crossed $10 million. By year 3, I had quietly hit $100 million. And still, to my family, I was Avery, the idealistic daughter who had wasted her Ivy League education on a hobby. Now, 15 years later, I stood on the helipad of my high-rise in Scottsdale, the morning wind teasing the edges of my silk blouse as I boarded my private helicopter. The sky stretched wide and blue, the city glittering below like a promise. That little white lie I'd let grow all those years ago had blossomed into a billion-dollar secret, and in just 2 days it would no longer be mine alone. My phone buzzed, a text from Dad. "Richard Blake, we need to talk." I smirked and powered down the screen. He could wait. They all could. The Forbes article dropped at precisely 6:00 a.m. I was already awake, black coffee in hand, seated in my sleek home office with a panoramic view of the desert horizon. The monitors lit up in sequence, displaying the headline in bold, "Digital Art Disruptor: How Avery Blake Quietly Built a $10 billion Empire." Beneath it, the photo I had personally approved, me poised in front of my best-selling VR exhibit, clad in a custom couture jumpsuit that cost more than Brooke's entire yearly salary. The article didn't just unveil my wealth, it charted every milestone of my journey, the platforms I'd built, the partnerships I'd inked, the auctions, the investors, the impact. My phone ignited with messages. "Brooke, wait. Is this real, 10B? Grant, I told you something was up yesterday. Mom, Avery, sweetheart, please call me. Dad, this must be a mistake. A different Avery Blake, surely. Aunt Claire is our Avery, the Avery in this Forbes article." I muted the chat, letting their confusion ferment. My inbox overflowed: interview requests, TED Talk invites, acquisition offers. But one email stood out from someone who'd once looked down his nose at me. Calvin Marshall, my father's longtime business partner. "Avery, I believe there may be strategic value in exploring synergies between Blake Interactive and Marshall Capital. I understand your father had reservations in the past, but I assure you we are open to evolving." I laughed, an honest, delighted, almost giddy laugh. 3 years ago, I had pitched them a collaboration. Calvin had stared me down across a polished boardroom table and said, "We don't gamble on internet gimmicks." The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Blake, Jenna said your mother is downstairs. Security says she's insistent." I sighed and pulled up the feed. There she was, Margaret Blake, flawless in her Chanel suit, arguing with the lobby guard like it was a matter of national security. Let her up. Time to face the first ripple of the coming storm. She entered slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floors, her eyes wide with disbelief as she took in the towering windows, the curated art, the Keith Haring original that cost more than her entire house. "Avery," her voice trembled, "what is all this?" "This," I said calmly, handing her a fresh cup of Colombian roast, as my real home. Not the modest little condo I keep for family visits. She walked to the window, confusion etching lines around her mouth. "But how? How long have you been living like this?" 15 years, I replied, leaning against the island. "Since the night you and Dad told me digital art was a phase. That no one in their right mind would take it seriously." Her perfectly made-up face darkened with something like recognition or regret. "We saw you struggling. That tiny apartment, the old car, asking for rent help." I gave a dry smile. "I never asked for help. I asked you to invest. There's a difference. And the apartment, the Civic, all part of the illusion. I gave you the Avery you expected, the broke dreamer, the one you could understand." She stared at me, lips parting in disbelief. "You lied to us. For 15 years. "No," I said, my voice soft but certain. "I just never corrected the story you all chose to believe." Her shoulders slumped, and she sank into one of my custom leather chairs. For the first time in years, she looked her age. "Does anyone else know?" she asked. "Just Grant," I said, almost gently. "He found out when the press release went live. I think he tried to warn you." She nodded faintly, her composure fraying like silk beneath a sudden gust. "He called your father," she murmured, her voice hollow. "Said it had to be a mistake. That it must be some other Avery Blake." I said nothing, only walked with quiet purpose to my desk and retrieved a matte black folder heavy with weight and implication. I handed it to her, watching as her manicured hands trembled around its edges. "This," I said evenly, "is the proposal I gave Dad 3 years ago. I asked him to invest $1 million. Had he done so, his share would be worth over $100 million today." Her fingers hovered over the documents like they might burn her. He said, "You were looking for a handout," she whispered, each word slower than the last, as if it betrayed her to repeat them. "That your art had failed. And you believed him." My voice was low, almost tender, but it carried a sharpness honed by years of swallowed pride. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Did any of you, I continued turning back toward the vast windows that framed the city below, ever attend an exhibit, Google my name, ask what I'd been working on? Anything. Silence. The city outside pulsed with life, unaware that inside this penthouse, a legacy was unraveling and being rewritten in the same breath. The reunion's still on, I said after a moment, but I changed the location. She blinked at me, unsure. I bought out the entire resort, I added. Too public. Too small. Everyone will be picked up in Rolls Royces flown on my jet and will be celebrating on my private island. Her mouth parted slightly. Your island, she echoed the words, fragile as blown glass. In the Caribbean, I said casually, as if discussing weekend plans. Bought it last year, right after I closed my first billion-dollar deal. Her eyes, usually so sharp, lost focus. Her hands fluttered to her sides as if searching for something solid to grasp. I stepped closer, no longer needing to raise my voice to be heard. And this time, Mom, I said softly but without hesitation. I won't be the quiet one at the dinner table smiling politely while everyone announces their promotions and real estate ventures. I have a few things I'd like to say, too. She straightened, slowly smoothing her silk skirt as though preparing for battle, her hands shaking with an elegance she could no longer maintain. Your father, her voice trailed cracked. When he sees all this, he'll have no choice but to admit it, that his daughter, his artist daughter, built something greater than anything the Blake name ever imagined. I smiled, and for once it wasn't to mask pain or buy silence. And that, I said gently, is just the beginning. I walked her to the elevator, the soft whir of its machinery breaking the tension like a punctuation mark. Just before the doors slid open, I turned to her one last time. Oh, and Mom, I said as though remembering a forgotten errand. Remember that Bentley you've always wanted, the one Dad said was too impractical. She looked puzzled, unsure whether this was a jest. I bought 3, I said with a shrug. Last month, just because I could. The doors closed on her stunned silence, her face frozen in a portrait of disbelief. The moment she was gone, I strode back to my desk and pressed the intercom. Jenna, is everything in place for the reunion? Her voice came back smooth and composed. Yes, Miss Blake. The island staff are fully briefed. Each guest will receive a personalized folder detailing every investment opportunity they declined over the years, along with current valuations. The video timeline of your achievements is finalized and queued for the welcome dinner. Excellent. I picked up my phone, opened the family group chat, a digital gallery of the very people who had once written me off, and typed a single message. Looking forward to seeing everyone at the reunion. Dress appropriately for a private island. Transportation will be provided. Then I refreshed my stock dashboard, watching the numbers leap in real time. The Forbes article had ignited a frenzy, another billion added to my net worth, before the sun even breached the skyline. Somewhere in his downtown office, I imagined my father pacing in disbelief, wondering how the daughter he dismissed at 22 had become one of the wealthiest women in the country. I thought of Brooke, probably still sipping her imported espresso and bragging about her 6-figure salary, her Hamptons beach house, her executive title, all while blissfully unaware that I could purchase her entire curated lifestyle with a week's interest. This reunion was going to be unforgettable. My phone buzzed again, a message from Dad. Richard Blake. We need to talk before the reunion. Some things are better discussed privately. I typed back, my fingers steady. Me, everything will be discussed at the reunion. Dad, isn't that what reunions are, for sharing our accomplishments? Then I tapped the intercom again. Jenna, have the helipad repainted. I want my name visible from the sky. It's already done, Ms. Blake, she replied, without missing a beat. Anything else? I paused, the weight of 15 years pressing into my chest. 15 years of being the dismissed, the laughed at, the one who was always just Avery. Yes, I said, a slow smile curling. Have the Forbes article framed. Hang it in every room on the island. I want it to be the first thing they see wherever they turn. As I ended the call, my gaze drifted to the glass. My reflection stared back, calm, unshakable, impossibly wealthy, and finally ready to show them all exactly who I'd become. The countdown was over. The morning of the reunion dawned clear and golden. A breeze curled across the tarmac of my private airfield in Scottsdale, rustling the edge of my blazer as I stood at the ready watching as 3 black Rolls Royces rolled in one after another, like scenes from a film. They had arrived. The doors opened. My father stepped out first, still upright, still steel-eyed, but there was something dimmed in his stride, some flicker of doubt cracking through his shell. My mother followed her Chanel suit pristine, but her expression unreadable, quieted by our last encounter. Behind them spilled the rest Grant and Brooke, then a scatter of aunts, uncles, and cousins all blinking in the harsh morning sun, their faces a gallery of disbelief, suspicion, and curiosity. And there at the center of it all, gleaming beneath the desert light like a dream made metal, stood my jet. Sleek, snow-white, its fuselage emblazoned in brushed silver Blake Interactive. "Welcome, everyone," I said, letting my voice carry warm but firm. "Hope the ride was comfortable." "Avery," my father said, stepping forward, as if to assert some remaining control. "This is a bit much. The resort would have been fine." I smiled slow and practiced. "The resort was too public, Dad. This reunion needed to be meaningful. On my island." "Your what?" Brooke muttered, clutching her Dior clutch tighter, her brows knitting. "Of course you have an island." As they boarded the jet, I watched their eyes shift, taking in the gold accents, the original art on the walls, the baccarat crystal flutes glimmering in the cabin light. "Is that a real Picasso?" Aunt Lisa whispered in awe. "Yes," I replied, walking past her. "Picked it up last year." My father cleared his throat, a faint blush rising. "Avery, perhaps we should talk." "We will," I said coolly, tilting my champagne flute toward him. "When we land. Until then, enjoy. This bottle alone costs more than your company made last quarter." He blinked, lips parting slightly, and I turned to take my seat. 2 hours later, we began our descent toward a sapphire jewel in the ocean, a 300-acre private island shaped by elegance and innovation, with a luxury resort at its heart, and my initials carved into the architecture. Let the reunion begin. And there it was visible from the sky, just as I had envisioned in the sleepless hours of planning a bold declaration of ownership, success, and transformation. My name, Avery Blake, stretched across the helipad in enormous silver letters, each one gleaming in the Caribbean sunlight so immense they seemed to rise into the clouds themselves, legible from altitudes where most reputations still hover in secrecy. "So, hi, what?" Brooke stammered, squinting through the jet window, momentarily misreading the oversized name etched into the tarmac. Her voice trailed into a gasp as comprehension struck. "Of course," she whispered, her mouth falling open. She branded the helipad. As we descended, their awe bloomed into stunned silence. Surrounding the landing zone were towering digital screens, each one sleek, towering, alive, cycling through my most successful immersive installations. Abstract worlds sculpted in code and soul shimmered across the displays. Beneath each piece, sale figures appeared like scorecards: $2.3 million, $670 million, $11.5 million. Every number was a monument to what they had dismissed. "Welcome to Blake Island," I said, stepping from the jet with deliberate grace, my heels clicking against the marble-veined landing pad, the sun catching the edges of my white silk blazer. My own little corner of paradise. Little Grant muttered under his breath, his gaze sweeping over the impossibly vast resort complex before him, where glass and greenery met in perfect balance, where the architecture felt like the future had kissed the untouched soul of the Caribbean. "The rooms are ready," I continued, walking ahead, as if I hadn't just detonated their understanding of who I was. "There's some reading material waiting in each suite. I strongly suggest you review it before dinner." Each folder had been carefully surgically tailored. For Richard, my father, a timeline of every pitch he'd ignored, annotated with present-day valuations, deals once dismissed as foolishness, now worth hundreds of millions. For Brooke, a biting but honest comparison between her annual corporate salary and the interest I accrued daily, what she considered her pinnacle, now reduced to a financial footnote. For Grant, an internal audit revealing how much his firm had lost by rejecting a partnership with my platform. Pages of figures, precise, unflinching. I gave them an hour to settle in, an hour to absorb the cognitive dissonance, the quiet betrayal of assumptions. Then I summoned them to the main dining hall. The space was a masterpiece of design walls of glass that opened to a panoramic sweep of turquoise waves, moonlight beginning to silver the tide as evening fell. The long dining table stretched like a gleaming runway beneath an arched ceiling embedded with soft ambient lighting. Crystal silver custom porcelain. Each place setting cost more than the average sedan. And on every wall, meticulously framed, backlit to demand attention, hung the Forbes article. My article. Their reckoning. They entered slowly, hesitation in every step. Their designer outfits, curated to impress, now looked strangely small, like costumes from a forgotten play. The grandeur of the space diminished them not out of cruelty but truth. "Please," I said, gesturing with a warmth that didn't quite mask my edge, "have a seat. We've got a lot to talk about." My father cleared his throat eyes, scanning the room like a man searching for an escape clause in a contract. "Avery," he began, summoning his most diplomatic tone. "I think I speak for all of us when I say we're surprised." Surprised, I repeated, letting the word rest on my tongue before releasing it with a soft, knowing laugh. "Not upset that I kept this from you. Not disappointed that I never shared the truth. Just surprised." Margaret, ever the careful voice, tried to soften the moment. "We didn't know, sweetheart. We couldn't have known." "No," I said, turning to face her, my voice clear as glass. "You didn't want to know. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject. Every time I offered you a seat at the table, you pushed it away." Brooke spoke next, her voice unusually quiet. "But the apartment, the Civic, the nights I picked up the check because you thought I was broke," I finished for her, lifting a brow. "Did that feel good, Brooke, playing the generous sister? The one who had her life together?" Her cheeks flushed with color. To her credit, she didn't deny it. "I'd like to show you something," I said, reaching for a discreet control embedded in the edge of the table. At the press of a button, panels above us began to hum and shift, sliding open as high-definition screens descended, lighting the space with soft blue glow. A digital timeline appeared, cycling through key moments in my life, each one juxtaposed against the exact words they had used to belittle them. "Onion, this 3D art thing is a waste of your degree. Dad." Result: first digital sculpture collection sold for $50,000. 2012, Avery, you need a real stable career. Mom. Result: company valuation hits $15 million. 2015. At least one of us is doing well. Brooke. Result: closed a $120 million partnership with a major tech firm. 2018, crypto art sounds like a scam. Grant. Result: platform surpasses 500,000 users and $600 million in sales. 2022. We don't fund internet gimmicks. Dad's firm. Result: company valuation crosses $3 billion. I watched their faces drawn pale, stripped of pretense. Every comment, every look, every time you dismissed what I was building. I remembered it all. And I used it. My father swallowed, his eyes flickering with something like guilt. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never wanted to hear it," I replied, calm but unwavering. "You all needed to learn something. Success doesn't always wear a suit. It doesn't follow the blueprint you handed me. Sometimes the person you underestimate ends up changing the entire game." I moved to the edge of the room, glass walls framing an ocean of infinite blue. "The hardest part wasn't keeping the secret. It was watching you all celebrate each other year after year while I sat there with a smile, quietly building an empire you couldn't see." "Safe," I repeated. "Safe was your ceiling. Mine was the stars." I turned to Brooke. "You paraded your six-figure salary like it was royalty. I made that during a coffee break." My father rose, his face taut. "Enough," he said, voice cracking under the strain. "We were wrong, okay?" "No," I said firmly, not unkindly. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm here for understanding." I pressed another button. The screens shifted again, revealing a rendering of my next creation, a prototype sleek and vibrant, a fusion of digital artistry and proprietary tech that would redefine how art was made, valued, and owned. "This launches next month," I said. "Projected valuation $10 billion. Their mouths parted, their breath stolen. This time there would be no dismissing it. Silence settled thick, unmovable, the kind of silence that follows the collapse of illusion. At last, my mother's voice broke through. "We're proud of you, Avery," she said quietly, her gaze steady for once. "We should have been proud all along." "Thank you," I said gently, but my tone held no need for validation. "But I didn't do this for your pride. I did it because it was my dream, my vision." I glanced around the dining hall, a gleaming cathedral of glass and light surrounded by the hush of endless ocean, and saw the truth made tangible, the opulence they could no longer ignore. They saw it now. Not as arrogance, not as excess, but as evidence. Of vision, of labor, of unrelenting belief. And now it was mine, my domain, my empire. Grant, his voice uncharacteristically soft, broke the silence. "So, what happens now?" I turned toward him, pouring myself a generous glass of wine, the bottle's neck catching the chandelier's glint like a crown. I took my time answering, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "Now," I echoed, my voice smooth. "Now we have dinner, as a family. But this time I let the pause breathe deliberate, we'll do it my way. No more tiptoeing, no more hiding. I lifted my glass to the truth. There was a brief stillness, a stretch of hesitance, but slowly, one by one, they raised their own glasses. Richard, Margaret, Grant, even Brooke, her eyes still rimmed with disbelief. The shock hadn't dissolved entirely, but something inside them had shifted, tilted, begun to fall away. It wasn't just understanding, they were beginning to see me. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dream unspooling after a long, restless night. Michelin-starred dishes arrived in delicate succession, paired with aged wine that could buy small apartments. Conversation came in cautious waves, at first quiet, measured, but then warmer, lighter. For the first time in 15 years, I was no longer the family's enigma. I was no longer their cautionary tale. They weren't just looking at me anymore. They were finally seeing me. When they retired to their suites, full dazed, emotionally disarmed, I remained behind in the grand dining space, now hushed and glowing under soft moonlight. I wandered to the edge of the glass wall where the sea whispered and shimmered the waves like silk against the shore. Jenna appeared beside me with her signature grace, her voice as gentle as the breeze drifting in through the open terrace doors. "Was it worth it?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. My thoughts returned to the slideshow of timelines, the stunned faces, the dawning pride that once seemed an impossible dream. "Yes," I said at last, exhaling, "but not for the reasons I expected." She tilted her head slightly. "It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore," I said, more to myself than her. "It was about stepping into who I've always been. Finally, fully, without apology." She smiled and then slipped away, her presence as unobtrusive as always. I stood alone a while longer, watching moonlight dance across the surface of the ocean, fluid, luminous, free. Their world, the one built on mutual funds, ladder climbing, and cautious respectability, was fading. Mine, with all its complexity and chaos and breathtaking possibility, was only just beginning. Later that night, back in my suite, I found a note tucked beneath my door. Heavy paper, familiar handwriting. It was from my father. "I was wrong, not just about your business, about everything. You didn't just succeed, Avery. You changed the game. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Dad." I stared at the page, my breath catching somewhere between disbelief and deep, aching recognition. Slowly, I walked over to the corner display shelf and placed the note beside another relic, a framed receipt from my first digital sale. $50,000. A fortune back then. A spark that lit a revolution. And there, side by side, stood the proof of where it began, and the man who had finally seen where it led. The next morning arrived bright and golden sunlight, casting long beams across the breakfast veranda. The family trickled in, no longer guarded, but curious, softened. Something fundamental had changed, an invisible wall, once impenetrable, now cracked with understanding. As I sat among them, watching their faces light with cautious questions and honest interest, I felt something I hadn't in years, peace. Not because they finally knew, but because I no longer needed them to. That's when I realized something essential, something quiet but profound. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And sometimes the sweetest victories aren't the loud ones, they're found in the silence that follows. In the stillness of knowing you built something extraordinary, while the world doubted you into invisibility. My phone buzzed, breaking the reverie. Breaking Blake Interactive announces revolutionary new platform. I smiled. The future had arrived. And this time they'd all be watching it unfold in real time. No more hiding. No more deflecting. Just me standing in the light of everything I had dared to create. If you're hearing my story now, then maybe it's not just mine anymore. And if stories like this remind you of your own quiet fire, or if you're walking your own version of this path, consider liking the video and subscribing. Not for algorithms, but for connection. For every silent builder out there who just needs a reminder you're not alone.